Really excited about being with you today, and thank you for joining us on this month's webinar on building a world-class team. For those of you who haven't been on one of my webinars before, my name is Graham, and I run Magical Learning with Danette. So let's launch into building world-class teams. Today we're going to talk about the key elements of a world-class team. What does that look like? What are the characteristics that make up a world-class team? We'll also talk about how to engage your team change by developing their adaptability intelligence, or their AQ, and we'll talk about AQ a little bit more. And then 5 strategies to develop your team as we go through. As usual, we have a few quotes that I think are relevant. I love this one from Helen Keller. Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. And again, a good reminder of the value of collaborating with others, particularly in a workplace context. Let's talk about some of the key elements of world-class teams. What does it look like? What do they need to have? One of the keys is the diversity of people, skill sets and opinions. Diversity has become something of a buzzword, certainly for much of the 1990s and the early noughties. Diversity was a huge thing. We had diversity programs implemented throughout organisations. There was a lot of work done on helping people to understand what diversity actually meant. In an organisational context, there's a lot of research available to highlight the benefits of having diversity in most teams, in most organisations, and certainly in most cultures. So people from different backgrounds, different ethnicity, different experience, different skill sets, and certainly different opinions is hugely important. Also, having a team that's strategically focused, and we'll talk more a little later on in the webinar about focus. There are a lot of sayings about trying to get people all heading in the same direction. You know, we're all on the same bus, all reading from the same, so we're on the same page in the same book, we're all cooking from the same recipe, whatever metaphor you want to use. But it is important that we are focused, that the team understands why it exists, what its strategic objectives are, and we're all focused on that together. Another key element for world-class performance in teams is high levels of communication. And communication is one of those interesting human skills that we tend to undervalue substantially. We have a lot of clients who work in professional spheres, accounting, legal, engineering. It's not unusual for us to devote time, money and energy into building our technical skills because they help us to advance in our career, get better jobs, earn more money, etc. But sometimes I get the sense that, and certainly this is the case for me for a long time, we feel that we'll get better communicating because we do it every day, so it'll just get better over time. But the reality is that good communication skills are not something that we're born with, and they are absolutely a set of skills that we need to work on. So one of the things to keep in mind for your teams, and this is whether you're a member of the team, whether you're leading the team, whether you manage, how do you provide opportunities for team members to build their communication skills? Another key element in world-class teams is high emotional intelligence, or EQ. And again, EQ has been around as an acknowledged skill set for human beings for decades. There was studies going back to the late 60s, early 70s. EQ became an accepted term in the 90s when Daniel Goleman first published a book called Emotional Intelligence, and Goleman's been one of the more active researchers and publishers in the area of emotional intelligence in organisations for a long, long time. He's certainly not the only one. And we'll talk a little more in detail about EQ shortly, but having good emotional intelligence within a team is critical for better performance. It also helps with things like communication as well. Another key element for world-class teams is being collaborative. So teams that have a collaborative approach generally, again, are focused on the same goals. They have a similar sense of purpose, understanding, and they work together. Teams that have more of a competitive or combative approach within the team generally will perform poorly and often will struggle to retain team members because the competitive approach over time becomes quite toxic, or it can. And this, in part, is also going back to the strategically focused thing, that high-performing teams also need to have shared or common goals. If we don't really understand why we exist as a team, where we're heading, what we're trying to achieve, everything else becomes really, really awkward, and it often becomes difficult to collaborate because members are literally heading in opposite directions or working at cross purposes. Teams also need to be technical and precise. So the technical skills aspect of teams is highly important in a lot of cases. If the team is working in a professional space or in a particular technical sphere, then obviously having strong technical skills is hugely important. If we have a team working in a finance area, for argument's sake, in an organisation, then at least some members of the team having strong finance skills becomes hugely important. And the precision in part applies to, again, how we communicate, how we work together. Good time management. Time management as a concept has been around for a bajillion years. I'd like to rephrase time management as probably self-management. Time just is. I mean, we've got 24 hours a day. Everybody gets exactly the same amount of time. As far as I'm aware, nobody's managed to work out how to get more hours into a day. So managing time as a concept is probably more about managing ourselves. But we'll talk a little more about some tools that you can use to get more out of the time that you allocate to your work days. And the last key element that we're going to touch on today is having a common vision and mission. And again, this in part goes back to our strategic focus, having common goals. But it's understanding not just what we do and how to do that, but it's understanding why we do what we do. So before we launch into all of this in detail, I just want to open this up to everybody on the call to start with. And I'd love to hear from you, what's missing in your team from your perspective at the moment? Okay, so a couple of questions coming in through the chat box. So from Stephen, a sense of cohesion in the team, which in part probably comes back to that shared vision, common goals. And that can be quite common, particularly with teams that have frequent changes in the team makeup. So we have people moving in and out of teams. It can sometimes be difficult to keep everybody focused on why we're doing what we're doing. From Sally, we don't communicate well. I'm not sure that there's as much trust as there could be. Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that, Sally. We are going to talk a little more in the webinar about trust. I think trust is a huge influencing factor in high-performing teams. So thanks for sharing that. So let's move on to talking about the importance of EQ, or emotional intelligence, in teams. As I said earlier, EQ has been around as an acknowledged aspect of human beings. It's a skill set that we can absolutely build. It's not something we're born with. People who have high levels of emotional intelligence only have those high levels because they have worked on developing them. Some of the reasons behind the importance of EQ in teams, one is just around self-awareness. So a key platform of EQ for everybody is understanding yourself better. Knowing your weaknesses, also knowing your strengths and being able to acknowledge and appreciate those strengths, understanding what drives you, what motivates you, understanding your values. So what matters, what's important to you in a work context and when you're working with other people in a team. But also understanding your impact on others. And there's an aspect of social skills in that as well. So self-awareness is hugely important. If I'm working in a team, with a team, and I have very low self-awareness, then things that happen that will upset me, I'll become emotional. And the minute I'm emotional, I also become irrational because the rational part of my brain starts shutting down. So suddenly I'm emotional, irrational, I could get cranky, I could become passive-aggressive and I just shut down, I don't communicate well, I don't listen, I don't trust others, I don't extend trust, I don't play well with others. So self-awareness has such a huge impact on our ability to work well with other human beings, and it's a key part of EQ. Another important aspect following on from self-awareness is self-management. So it's one thing to understand my emotional states and be able to put a name to the emotion that I might be feeling at any point. It's another thing to be able to regulate or control my emotional reactions to things that happen and do that in a safe, healthy, productive way. So self-regulation or self-management is not about pretending that I'm not emotional, and it's not about suppressing emotions. And again, there's a lot of really good science in the last decade or so to show that when we try and suppress emotions, it's actually quite dangerous. It can be damaging. It certainly doesn't help the emotion disappear. So self-management is experiencing something that would normally cause an emotional response in us, but being able to control that response in the moment and then have a healthy process for dealing with that emotional state a little later on. So again, a clear example of that, and I speak from personal experience a long time ago when I was a lot less self-aware, and by the way, my EQ is something that I continue to work on. But in a previous life, if something happened at work that made me angry, everybody around me would automatically know that I was angry and they would just not come near me. So I had very little self-awareness. I didn't understand why I was angry, and I had zero self-management. So I wasn't able to regulate my emotional state in a way that supported and served myself and the team. Somebody with a high level of self-management, some of the other notes on the slide there, people with high self-management or high level of self-management are often seen as trustworthy. They have integrity. They're also quite comfortable with change. So I can be very adaptable to change because I understand that by default, as a human being, change makes me experience an emotional state. Another aspect of EQ is motivation. Now, this is in part of understanding what drives people and what their goals are. It's also about understanding what drives me as a human being. And this in part, again, comes back to self-awareness. But understanding what motivates others in a team context is a fantastic data source for then understanding how to work better with people to help them move towards their goals whilst you're also achieving the team's goals. Another important element of emotional intelligence is empathy. Empathy is often a skill that many of us believe we're exceptionally good at, but I'm not convinced that that's the case. And certainly my own experience with empathy is that sometimes it's really hard work. So empathy really is understanding other people's emotional makeup. It's not literally feeling what they're feeling, because I don't believe that's possible. Our emotions are created in our brain, and everybody's brain's different. So it's not possible for me to feel the emotional state of someone else. But empathy is much more about understanding that emotional state for that person is completely valid for them at that time. It's also important to use empathy in considering other people's feelings when you make decisions in a team context. So even just recognizing that you need to make a decision from a work perspective, and you believe that it may upset a couple of people in the team because you understand their emotional makeup, you understand their emotional triggers. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't make that decision if it needs to be made, but you will at least be aware of the potential emotional impact, and that enables you to either communicate the decision differently or perhaps make sure that those team members have additional support so that they can manage the emotional reaction to that decision. People with high empathy, high level of empathy, generally one of the common descriptors from others about those people is that they are great listeners. There's a really good video from Brené Brown, and Brené's done a massive amount of research and published several books on things like shame and vulnerability. She has a really good video that only runs for about 3.5 minutes on empathy. The last element of emotional intelligence is social skills. So social skills is your ability to influence others' emotions by understanding them. Having a high level of social skills also enables you to build rapport more with others through better listening, so active listening, where I'm completely engaged with the conversation that I'm having with somebody else. I have no distractions. I'm just completely open to that conversation. Other things that you can use to build rapport with others include your verbal, non-verbal communication, etc. Social skills in part is also understanding the impact that your emotional state has on other people. What comes out of building better emotional intelligence in teams is higher resilience. And your resilience is, I mean, it's described, if you look up resilience in the dictionary, it says the ability to bounce back a certain toughness. The level of resilience that we have is often indicated by how quickly we can bounce back from something that may cause us to be stressed. Resilience is also having a sense of positivity about your existence. So it's not just being stubborn or pig-headed and being able to drag yourself out of bed in the morning and drag yourself through your work day and then go home and do what needs to be done and collapse into bed and get up the next day and do it all over again. That's not resilience by itself. It certainly is a part of resilience, but I think the more important aspect of resilience is having a positive sense of yourself and your existence and why you do what you do. And the comment on the slide there about employees less likely to burn out. So that burnout is becoming such a common theme because we're often being asked to do more with less. We're all committed to doing a good job, getting more done. We want to feel as though we're contributing. We want people to believe that we're capable. So we tend to put more and more time and effort and energy into what we're doing. And one of the consequences of that is we sometimes spend less time taking care of ourselves. And this is one of the keys in resilience is spending, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, but doing something every day that refuels you, that refills your well, or it's like the oxygen mask in the plane. Resilience is having lots of oxygen when you need it, but it's making sure that you're doing things to refill your oxygen tank, if that makes sense. Some of the common indicators that your team has perhaps less emotional intelligence than would be helpful. One is the common multitasker. And look, I've worked with clients where senior managers were saying to their staff, I expect you to be able to multitask. It's a requirement of the job. And again, there's a lot of, and I understand why managers look at that and think it's important, but there's a lot of really good science that has come out in the last 4 or 5 years in particular about the impact of multitasking, and particularly the emotional impact that it has on us. So if you find that you are a chronic multitasker, just become aware of that. Recognize that whenever we're trying to do lots of things at once, we never do any of those tasks as well as we could if we just focused on one. But it also has an impact. It has a drain on our energy levels, and it negatively affects our emotional state. So be aware of that. Another common indicator that your team has low EQ is I've run out of steam. I have no energy left. I literally, it's all I can do to drag myself into work each day. And how does this relate to emotional intelligence, the fact that I have no energy? Well, your energy state in part is a result of your emotional state. So if you are constantly, and this comes back to the comment I made earlier about not having any oxygen left because I give it to everyone else. If I spend all of my time looking after everybody else and giving to everyone else, and I never spend time giving back to myself, then at some point I will literally run out of energy. If I have very low emotional intelligence, I'm not aware. I know I have low energy, but I don't know why, and I don't recognize that that's a problem. If I've got higher EQ, I become aware faster that my energy is starting to drop, and I have some strategies for re-energizing myself. Another one is the emotional state. So I just burst into tears at the drop of a hat, or I become emotional, I become angry, whatever it happens to be. And again, this is often a common sign that, one, my resilience is quite low, and often my resilience is low because my self-awareness is not as high as it could be, and I don't understand the importance of managing myself, my energy, my emotional state. Stress bunnies. The sky is falling, the world is coming to an end. Again, somebody with low emotional intelligence in the area of self-awareness and self-management often will just become stressed, and all of a sudden something happens, and then it's a complete disaster. It is literally, it's the end of the world as we know it. My life is ending. Nothing will ever be the same again because I don't understand what's triggering my emotional reaction, and I don't have the tools to be able to manage that reaction in a more positive, healthy way. Another indicator of low EQ within teams is miscommunication. And this is so common. I mentioned earlier that we often don't spend time building our communication skills, but this is a very common example of low emotional intelligence, because we communicate, and it's not literally in different languages, but it may as well be. And part of this, again, is driven by the emotional reaction or state that we may be in when we're trying to communicate with somebody else. And if they're not understanding us, it makes us more emotional because I'm explaining it. I can't be more clear. I don't understand why you don't understand what I'm saying to you. We're both speaking the same language. What is your problem? When I go into that sort of emotional reaction, it completely changes the way I think. It changes the way I listen. It also changes the way I speak. So not being able to regulate myself emotionally has a huge impact on my ability to communicate with someone else in my team. I like this cartoon. I had a student in a class once describe this as wanting to perform percussive maintenance on my computer. Most of us work in buildings where if it's multi-story, you can't open the windows, so the opportunity or the option for throwing your computer out the window doesn't normally exist. I'm certainly not recommending that. But you know, sometimes, again, when I have low emotional intelligence, when I've got low self-awareness and low self-management skills, something that happens causes me to fly into a rage. I get cranky. My computer won't work. It's taken hours to log on. I'd got 80% of the way through that task, and then all of a sudden the network fell over. I'm just going to take it out on my computer. And if I can't do that, then I'll just take it out on everyone around me. So again, another common sign that our EQ skills aren't necessarily where they could be. Just wrapping up on the EQ thing, the good thing about emotional intelligence is that there's so much information publicly available about EQ. There's a lot of really good books. There are some great authors who publish blog posts and articles on platforms such as LinkedIn about emotional intelligence. So it's becoming easier and easier to build your EQ skills. If you have questions about how you might do that, some of the specific things that you can do to build EQ, please feel free to ask and I'll be happy to share. Okay, I wanted to move on to talking about time management. As I said, I still prefer to frame this as self-management, but this is a really great model that was developed by Dr. Stephen Covey. Covey was the author of, his most popular book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And Covey spent decades researching organizations, looking at leaders, what made them effective, what made leaders perform better than others. And this was a tool that he developed to help people understand how to get more value, more benefit, more productivity from the time that they spent at work. The matrix is built around 2 axes. So one is about the degree of urgency related to the task that I'm doing, and the other is about the amount of importance attached to that task. So there are 4 quadrants, and the first quadrant, quadrant 1, is where I'm working on things that are important and urgent. Covey calls this firefighting. This is where most of us will spend some time during our work days because we're working on things that need to be done urgently. They are important. They're related to my work role. They're important for the team, whatever it happens to be. So firefighting is quite common. The challenge with firefighting is it can be a high stress environment. And whilst a lot of us like to believe that we perform better under stress, our brain doesn't. So we get a bigger dopamine hit when we're under stress and we get something finished and it makes us feel good, but our brain actually doesn't perform as well when it's stressed as it does when it's not stressed. Firefighting is, again, a common area for us where we're working on things that are important and they're urgent. Quadrant 2 is quality time. And this is where we're working on things that are important, but they're not urgent. This is where we're being proactive, where we have a better grasp on the things that really matter in the work that we're doing. So we're getting to a lot of the tasks that we do each day before they become urgent. Interestingly, quality time also includes breaks. So, the whole time management thing in part is not about thinking, well, if I just spend an extra hour at my desk each day, I'll actually get more done. Studies have shown that if we don't take regular breaks, that doesn't work. So working 8 hours straight with 0 breaks, what you'll find is that somewhere around the second or third hour, your productivity will start to slip. And the longer you stay at work without taking a break, the more your productivity and the quality of the work that you do drops off. So quality of time, hugely important. Work on things that are important, but before they become urgent. Quadrant 3 is the distraction zone. This is where we're working on things that are not important but somehow they're urgent. Distractions in a work context can be just having a chat with somebody about the fact that you've got so much work on but you don't really want to do it, checking your emails yet again, checking your social media, just staring off into space. I mean, there's some value actually to be said for daydreaming as a practice for creativity, but distraction is when procrastination is also a common example of distraction. And the last quadrant is Quadrant 4, where we're working on things that are neither important nor urgent. This is where we're wasting time. And again, this is absolutely social media. Unless social media is literally a part of your job for most, and it's just wasting time of social media, gossiping, reading the newspaper. Again, the objective with this model is to spend a bit of time at the end of each day looking at where you've spent your time during the day. So how much, let's look at, in terms of percentages, how much time did I spend in Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2, Quadrant 3, Quadrant 4? And then the key is really looking at how much time did I spend in Quadrants 3 and 4, and how can I move some, if not all of that time back up into Quadrant 2. Now, to give you an example of what high-performing teams plan or what they seek to achieve in terms of their time management, this is, again, from studies done by Stephen Covey on high versus average performing teams. So the Quadrant 1, firefighting. High-performing teams know that they plan to spend 20 to 25% of their time in firefighting because they work in organisations. We don't always control when things become urgent. Sometimes we just have to get stuff done. Urgent things can be dropped on our table. We just need to deal with them. By contrast, average performing teams only spend a little bit more time in Quadrant 1, so about 25 to 30%. The big difference is in Quadrant 2. This is quality time. This is where we're working on things that are important, but they're not yet urgent. High-performing teams, 65 to 80% of their time in Quadrant 2. Average performing teams, only about 15% of their time. And we go into Quadrant 3, the zone of distraction. High-performing teams spend around 15% of their time in the distraction zone. Average performing teams are being distracted 50 to 60% of their day, which is massive. Distractions can also include simple things like having your phone on your desk, face up and connected. Every single time the phone beeps, the screen flashes because you have another message or another notification, that's a distraction. If you're working on a task that requires a lot of focus and attention, it can take 6 to 10 minutes for you to get your head back into the state it was before you were distracted. So again, high-performing teams know the importance of distraction-free time, so they take steps to minimise those. Quadrant 4, the time wasters, high-performing teams plan to spend less than 1% of their time in Quadrant 4. Average performing teams, again, only 2 to 3% of their time in time wasting. So it's the distraction zone more than anything else that is the big difference between high performance and average. Another great quote from the 1 Minute Manager author, Ken Blanchard: "None of us is as smart as all of us." Again, a great reminder of the value of teams. Some of the things that you can do to engage your team through what we call Adaptability Quotient or Adaptability Intelligence. And Adaptability Intelligence is really, it's a relatively new field of study where we're looking at what are the skills and attitudes that we need to have to become much more adaptable to the constant change, to the pace of change, to the unknowns, to everything that's going on in work, society, and organisations. So engaging our teams, working with common vision and values, getting everybody literally on the same page. It's not unusual for a team to function for 2 or 3 years without ever really sitting down and asking the question, why are we here and what are we doing? Do we all have a shared understanding of what our goals are? Another thing to engage a team with is celebrating the strength of the individuals in the team. Also acknowledging the importance of psychological safety. And I'll come back to psych safety a little bit later on. So talking about common vision and mission, some basic questions here. Are we heading in the same direction? Do we have the same understanding of why this team exists? And we talk about vision and mission. So the vision really is our future position. It's the mid to long term, where we want to be, where we want to go, what do we want to look like as a team. And a mission is really our business, it's our objectives, and it's how we're going to achieve or reach those objectives. So a lot of work that we do with our clients around building high-performing teams is building rituals around things like revisiting things like vision and mission on a regular basis, at least once every 3 to 6 months. It's sitting down for 10 minutes or maybe 30 minutes and going back over. Do we all have the same understanding of why we exist? Has anything changed? Do organisational objectives or strategy, has that shifted, which has also influenced the vision for this team? Do we understand our mission? Do we have a same shared sense of what that mission is? Engaging and celebrating the strengths of individuals. If I'm leading the team or managing the team, a great question to ask is, what do I know about each of my team members' skills and strengths? How are we leveraging or taking advantage of those skills and strengths within the team? And how am I acknowledging the strengths of each team member? And that can be both covertly, but particularly overtly. So how do I let them know that I value what they bring to the team? And another really important thing in celebrating the strength of individuals is, how do we celebrate all of that as a team? The psychological safety piece, Google ran a project internally a couple of years ago called Project Aristotle. And what they were trying to understand was what made some of their teams perform so much better than other teams. So the project took about 18 months from start to finish. It involved 120 plus active teams. And the people who were running the project interviewed over 200 employees at all levels across Google. And again, what they were trying to understand is, what are the key elements of high-performing teams within Google? And the number one factor was psychological safety. Google's description of that in the report that came out of Project Aristotle: team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. So again, sometimes it can be a very powerful thing to hit the pause button occasionally, sit down as a team and ask the question, how safe do we feel as a team? How safe do I feel with the team to be able to take a risk and know that if it goes pear-shaped or if it doesn't work, that I'm not going to be hung out to dry, that people won't be pointing the finger of blame at me? How safe do I feel in being vulnerable with my team and admitting sometimes I don't have the answers, I don't know how to do it, I actually need help, or I don't know. And I feel okay in saying that I don't know, because there is that level of psychological safety within the team. Hugely important. Another one-word replacement for psychological safety is trust. How much trust is in our team? Seth Godin, love Seth Godin. I just love the way that the man thinks. And a great quote about trust: earn trust, earn trust, earn trust. Then you can worry about everything else. Another really smart guy, Patrick Lencioni, wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the underlying number one requirement for a team to become high performing over time was trust. If you don't have trust, it doesn't matter how smart the people are. It doesn't matter how many qualifications, how much experience they have. It doesn't matter how many resources that you throw at them. If they don't have trust within the team, they'll never perform to the level that they could. So some quick strategies to develop your team: become a leader coach, look at ways to improve communication across your team, understand each other's strengths, and again, acknowledge those strengths and look to leverage those. Also, be okay with conflict and include everybody in planning, visioning, strategy for the team. So becoming a leader coach is really helping your team members grow, not by giving them the answers or by directing them in doing things, but ask better questions. Help them arrive at their own insights, their own aha moments, so that they own those. Help them to and empower them to solve their own challenges rather than solving them for them. How do you improve communications within your team? Again, I believe on a level we all believe we're pretty good at it because we communicate so often. But are we actually that good? Great teams always communicate more rather than less. Some other things about understanding each other's strengths is, again, just being aware of. So it's literally acknowledging, recognizing, articulating the strengths that each team member brings to the team. One of the things that can absolutely help with just identifying each other's strengths to start with is using an assessment tool. And there's a range of them available. Some of the tools that we use include the team management systems, TMP profile, the DIS profile. Roche Martin have an emotional capital report that we use. For leaders, we use John Matone's leadership Enneagram inventory assessment, which is a much more leadership specific tool, but there are a range of really good psychological personality tools available to help all of us understand ourselves better, but also understand those that we work with more completely. Another important thing for teams is to be okay with conflict. It's often a belief that high-performing teams perform so well because they don't disagree, and that's not true. High-performing teams actually have conflict, but they're just really good at managing it. They have a very positive, healthy, balanced way of dealing with disagreement and conflict. And it absolutely is okay to disagree. One of the things that high-performing teams do is they look for opportunities to not agree with each other, rather than looking for opportunities just to nod and say, yes, no, that sounds like a good idea. Inclusion is also hugely important. Everyone needs to be valued and included. Everyone needs to feel included. O.C. Tanner ran a global study in 2018. And again, they were looking at what's the one single factor that's helping organisations and teams move ahead faster than every other factor. And that one factor was appreciation. So feeling that I am included in the team, that I'm appreciated for being part of the team, is hugely important. So a bit of a whirlwind finish there at the end, but before we do wrap up, I just want to again open up to any final questions from anyone on the call. I also want to just remind everyone that if you have questions after today, if something comes up in a couple of days' time, please feel free to reach out to us either through any of our social media channels, drop us an email, learn@magicallearning.com, and we will be more than happy to get back to you with responses to your questions. If there are no final questions, just a couple of quick things. We have some new programs coming up in the next month or so. You can check details on our website. So we're running an AQ leadership program. We have one starting in Canberra next week. It's probably a little late to jump on that one, but certainly there'll be another one happening in August and September in Canberra, Sydney and Melbourne at this stage. So if you're interested in those, please feel free to contact us. We also have another webinar happening next month, so keep an eye out for our newsletter. We'll also be advertising that webinar through our social media channels as well. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you so much for your time today. I hope this has been valuable for you. Feel free to reach out at any point. If you're not already following us online, we'd love to be connected with you. So please feel free to connect on any of our social media channels. We provide lots of free resources, articles, obviously these webinars, we have videos, infographics. We like sharing a lot of the research that's being published nowadays that might be relevant to you. So that's it for me. Have a fantastic day. Thanks for being with us today, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you on the call next month. Bye for now.